Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing the Trump tapes by Bob Woodward. These tapes, 20 discussions between Bob Woodward and President Trump, were the basis for his book Rage, which I reviewed on this channel. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card. What's interesting about this, I obviously had already read that book and I got a lot out of it. What's interesting about this is the unvarnished transcript of everything. And if you listen to the audio, you can actually hear the president speaking. And there's also, as an appendix to this, all of the correspondence he had with Kim Jong-un, which was interesting in its own right. But the last letter that Kim Jong-un writes to the president is quite revelatory, and I think it's interesting. So I'll read that at the end. But throughout, I just want to revisit themes that the president has brought back to us, particularly in his second term, how he conducts himself, the way he views the world, the way he sees his role in American society and in world leadership. And over and over and over, we see this insecure man, incapable of actually leading, but mostly just looking at polls, the stock market, and complaining about the fake news. It's just over and over. And the theme is consistent throughout the text, and I think you'll hear that. So sometimes I'll comment, sometimes I'll let the president speak for himself, but I'll let you hear. So I think this first conversation is taken from before he becomes president, when Woodward was still looking at him as a outside possible winner. So this is March the 31st, 2016. And Trump says, "I can be very presidential. I jokingly say I could be more presidential than any president that this country has ever had, except for Abraham Lincoln, because he was sort of, right, you can't out-top Abraham Lincoln." So already he needs to be the EST of any conversation, because there's no humility, and also there's no recognition, as if he would know anything about American presidents. He's not a student of history. He's not someone who reads books. So how would he know? And as if there were any sort of measurement of who looks more presidential. So I can be more presidential than any president that this country has ever had, except Abraham Lincoln. He continues, "My natural inclination is to win, and after I win, I will be so presidential that you won't even recognize me." So the bragging is already beginning in March of 2016. Here we have a continuation. What's your instinct, your plan for, let's say, the first 100 days? How do you turn all this around? This is from Woodward. Trump answers, "Okay, well, I say this. Look, okay, I would do a number of things. Number one, I would start negotiating great trade deals using, I know the best people, you know? You think that you can turn around in 100 days? No, it can't, no, but I would start the negotiation." So that's the president's first answer to what are the challenges our country faces. I need to do economic negotiations, and I know the best people. Woodward says, "Reagan was mourning in America, and it's almost like you're saying, at least for a while, mourning in the ditch, that we are not going to be able to get out because of these trade deals because of your pessimism about the economy." Trump, "Look, we are losing $500 billion a year on trade deficits with China, okay? We've been for a long time, from 200 to 500. We're losing hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars a year on trade." So periodically, Woodward will put in commentary. Now, I'll get to this later. Woodward is insufferable on lecturing the president about COVID and about Black Lives Matter. It's the most I've ever seen him insert himself into one of his books, his particular, as if we care what Bob Woodward thinks about anything. The only reason we're reading this is because we want to know the mindset of the figures that he's interviewing. But sometimes the commentary is helpful, and here's one of those times. Trump's claim that the U.S. is losing about $500 billion because of the trade deficit with China is a significant misunderstanding. The trade deficit means Americans are buying approximately $500 billion more in goods from China than China is buying from the U.S. The money is not lost. Americans get the goods they purchased. China often winds up with more money in the form of U.S. Treasury bonds. So this idea of a trade deficit, it sounds good to Americans who have not been educated about it. Yeah, we're getting ripped off. But the question is, well, what are we building that China needs? You have to build something other people want to buy. You can't force every nation in the world to buy as much from us as we buy from them. That's just silly. And it's an arbitrary idea. that we're not going to be able to be at trade parity with everybody. That's just not how trade works. Whether you believe in free trade or not, I don't, but that's a different conversation. I'm just saying that academically, it doesn't make any sense that we'd be on the same level with every nation. Trump continues, I am a person that's going to bring the country together. I'm a person that's going to unify the country. President Obama is a divider. He is not a unifier. When he first got elected, I didn't have great feelings for the fact that he was going to do well. But the one thing I thought, he would be able to unify the country. African American, white, I thought that he would be a unifying factor. He has not been. So the idea that President Trump would be lecturing about who is a unifier and who is a divider, and that he would think that he himself would be a great unifier, is okay. This is 2016. This is 2016 Trump, and he may have had those illusions shattered by now, but he wouldn't walk back. Here's more, and now we're going to get to the grievance against the news. So that's good and it's bad. The bad is that they want to do nothing but cover me. They write stories that they don't even make sense. I'm just saying, I wish I could be covered accurately and fairly by the media. Well, this goes against the idea that the president loves the free media coverage, and then he expects to be covered accurately and fairly when he says himself that they're not. What would the solution be? The solution is not to complain about the so-called fake news all the time. The solution is to just lead. Leaders lead. They don't sit there and complain. Tom Brady has famously said, and I think he might be channeling Coach Belichick here, if you're explaining, you're losing. The idea is for you to move forward, not to complain about the ankle biters and the detractors. And that's what the president does. He needs to have everything go his way all the time. And that's why he didn't blink an eye. I think the other day there was some so-called poll that 100% of MAGA is behind the president. I mean, these are North Korea numbers. But he loves that stuff. If you go back to The Art of the Deal, there's a vignette in there in which he looked at every magazine or newspaper. His assistant had marked up, put a Post-it note where his name had been mentioned, and he would go through to make sure what was said was accurate. This just shows you the insecurity. People who are great leaders do not worry about what other people are saying about them to be obsessively looking at 80 magazines in a given day or 40 magazines or whatever the number might be. They just lead, and they let the ankle biters be ankle biters. But that's not who the president is. He's a deeply insecure man who always needs approval from everybody. And unless he gets approval from everybody, he's complaining about it. That's not what great leaders are made of. So this is talking about Kim Jong-un later on. It doesn't mean that I think it's going to be wonderful. He's a very tough cookie, and he is smart, very smart. Woodward, you're convinced he's smart. Beyond smart. Look, he took over when he was 25 years old. I mean, keep in mind, the president thinks anybody's smart. All you have to do is go up and talk to him about something he doesn't know anything about, and you're smart. And that's why you have to realize policy decisions are made realistically by whomever was the last person the president spoke with. Whoever he speaks with last, that's who gets his ear, and that's how he makes decisions until the next person speaks to him. So this next conversation, this is, I think, definitely past 2016. I want to make sure I'm giving the right dates when I'm citing this. Obviously, the last one I had read is after the potential starting of the discussions with Kim Jong-un. So these are from December 2019, these quotes that I'm going to read. Trump says, because it just didn't work out, you understand, he got fired, and pretty viciously by Obama, and I viewed that as a good thing, but ultimately he was an Obama-type guy. He's talking about James Mattis here. He was, that was his mentality. No, it was a mistake. It's okay. Not a bad guy, but he was highly overrated. I took out ISIS 100%. When we came in, we had, they say 99%. Well, I don't care what they said. Remember here, the president doesn't take any responsibility for his nominees. He's the one who selected Mattis, and then he says it was bad, but he didn't say that he made a mistake, because the president can't say that he made a mistake. He's incapable of the humility it takes to say, I was wrong. In any situation, it could have been about the groceries, it could have been about, what color something was. He can't be wrong. He can't be seen to be wrong. So here, Woodward is saying ISIS was 99% taken out. And Trump says, I don't care what they said. They can say whatever. It was a mess. It was all over. I defeated ISIS. Then remember, I said, all right, I've got 98%. I'm getting out. And everyone went, no, do 100%. And that's when I went to Iraq and I met with some generals, and it was all an interesting thing. But we took it over and we did a great job. We cleaned it out. That's another. I don't even put that down, but that's another, I said. Mike, nobody has ever done more in less than 3 years than what we've done in this administration. And it's not even close. Nobody, no other administration, even close. First 3.5 years. Could the president name 4 or 5 administrations outside of the last 20 years that he's studied? What would he know? All he's surrounded by is a bunch of sycophants telling him he's the greatest ever. But there is no evidence for these claims. And people who would try to counter these claims, I would say, could you name any? So when someone says he's the greatest president, I said, well, who would be like 3 or 4 others that would be in the conversation, and explain why? They can't. That's the whole thing, that if you are in a situation in which you're claiming to be the greatest, you need to have some reference point. If you're going to say something like no one's ever done as much as we have, okay, well, who has come close? And if you can't answer that, that means your measuring is useless. First 3.5 years, and I've been under a cloud. I told him from the day I came down on the escalator with our beautiful first lady of the future, our beautiful first lady, by the way, who people love. Did you see how many retweets she had? He's asking Woodward this question as if Woodward cares, as if anybody is going around and counting how many retweets. This is how the president measures truth, correctness, popularity, looking at social media. Woodward, I think polls are BS, President Trump. Trump, I don't know. You know what? I'll tell you what the Trump-Pence strategy is. You know what the Trump-Pence strategy is? To do a good job. That's all it is. It's very simple. It's not a I don't have a strategy. I do a good job. Because Woodward's asking, what's the strategy? The president doesn't make plans. He just makes decisions on his gut. The gut changes from day to day and from hour to hour. We're watching this happen in Iran. He fabricates a lie to make sure that he can manipulate the markets and tells everybody, oh, don't worry. We've been having very good talks with Iran, and we'll revisit this again in 5 days. It's because Iran blew off his ultimatum. He said, if nothing's not done in 48 hours, we're going to unleash whatever. And Iran published the list of targets. Okay, go ahead and do that, and here's what's going to happen. Trump then backs down and then paints it as a win and then lies. The Iranians deny that there's been any conversations happening. But he says that there were, and it goes back to what he's saying here in 2019. I don't have a strategy. I do a good job. He has so much confidence in himself and his own feelings that it doesn't matter. You don't need to study anything. You don't need to listen to people who speak Arabic, who speak Chinese, who spent years with those people. None of that matters. Speaking the language, knowing the history of a people, that doesn't matter. What matters is my gut. I'm so smart. Here's more, and this is, I think, more reflection on the conversations with Kim Jong-un, which I'm realizing now people really were interested in at the time. And I think they were a pretty big deal, but we were mistaken to think that anything would come from it because the president is so unserious. He is such a photo op person. And that's what I noted in that book review, is he kept bragging to Woodward about the photos and say, well, no one's ever done this and no one's ever done that. So, yeah, no one's ever wasted a bunch of time with the North Korean leader also and then not had anything afterwards. And that's what also happened. And here Woodward says, what did he say that caused you to like him? The president responds, like, we're smart people, but you have people that no matter what you do, you're not going to like, and they're not going to like you. I have those people, no matter. We're smart. Like, we're totally the smartest, right? We got along great. That's the thing. The president says Kim Jong-un is smart, but then he says he's smart too, and that he's their smartest. Again, no humility, no awareness. He clearly is not the smartest person. But that's not what great leaders do. Great leaders don't constantly need to tell people. And that goes to the same. I've said this before in relation to LeBron James. LeBron James constantly, because he's so insecure, and part of that is father issues. Remember that so many problems in civilization today come from fatherless homes. So LeBron James needs to go around making the case, campaigning, I am the greatest. But the whole thing is the greatest don't need to tell people that they're the greatest. They just are. And so the president keeps saying things like, I'm the best, I'm the greatest, I'm the smartest, because he's deeply insecure, because deep down, I think he knows he's not. Or he might delusionally believe himself to be the case. But as is the case in any field, the winners, the champions, the leaders, the best, do not need to say that they are the best because everyone else knows. That's how it is. And the president constantly needs to take up all of our time by telling us how smart and awesome and great he is, instead of just putting his head down and doing the work. He's not interested in doing the work. He's not interested in reading. He's not interested in learning. He's not interested in listening. These are the things that would be necessary to govern successfully. And that's why he's been such a disaster of a president, by and large, across both terms. So commentary here from Woodward, which, as I said, sometimes the commentary is very helpful. This is another one of these insights, which I mentioned in the review on Rage. Trump's former director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, believed the greatest threat to the U.S. national security apparatus was that Trump wanted to ignore any kind of process that went through experts, people steeped in certain issues or certain parts of the world. The president believed he could pick up the phone and call anybody he wanted. And that's true. Obviously, as the president, you can. Trump's attitude was, I can solve all these problems. He didn't care for expert professional assessments or options. He thought he could get better intelligence on his own. Coates knew that key leaders such as Putin, Xi of China, and Erdogan of Turkey would lie to Trump. They played Trump skillfully. They would roll out the red carpet for him, flatter him, and then the leaders would do what they wanted. Because all three of those leaders are actual leaders. Whether you like them or not, they are skilled men who know what they're doing, who understand their country's history. The president is not like that. He's a reality television star, a real estate mogul of sorts, and he thought that qualified him to be the president, which is why later there'll be a quote which you might laugh at as much as I did on that point. So here, Woodward is continuing to ask for access to the letters. The president had promised them and then not given them to him. And so Trump says, there's nobody that's tougher than me. Nobody's tougher than me. You asked me about impeachment. I'm under impeachment. And you said you just act like you won the race. Nixon was in a corner with his thumb in his mouth. Bill Clinton took it very, very hard. I just do things, okay? I do what I want. Woodward later on, as soon as the Watergate burglars were caught, if Richard Nixon had gone on television and said, I'm the man at the top, I'm indirectly responsible for this, I'm sorry, I apologize, it would have gone away. You don't think so? Trump, I would never have done it here. Yeah, Nixon should have done that, but I shouldn't have done because I did nothing wrong. And this is the whole question about Ukraine and the phone call he had with Zelensky about prosecuting going further with the corruption issues with Burisma and Hunter Biden, etc. And once again, the president's lack of humility sunk him in his own administration, that if he had simply said, here's the tape of the conversation, there was nothing untoward, here's my case that I made it, let the media howl, and he moved on. Instead, he got pulled into a trap of his own making. Over and over, the president, due to his own actions, has shot himself in the foot. His own appointments, people like John Bolton, one of the worst swamp monsters in the history of swamp monsters, he appointed Bolton. And there's a revolving door. He hires people and then he fires them because he thinks that running a country is like running a company. You can just fire people all the time and we'll have a great, amazing winning success as a country. Woodward keeps going on this apology point. When's the last time you apologized? Trump. Oh, I don't know. But I think over a period, I would apologize. Here's the thing. I'm never wrong, okay? And then the text says laughter. But the president, he is pretty much serious here. No, if I'm wrong, I believe in apologizing. This was a totally appropriate conversation. We have an agreement with Ukraine. So a little bit of truth there spilling out. The president doesn't ever believe he's wrong. We know that, okay? Just own that. Don't say that you would apologize. You're not an apologizing type. You don't remember the last time you apologized because you don't apologize. This is January 2020. And here, just as a side note, he's bragging about the deal that he had with China. The deal is extraordinary. They're going to be spending $250 billion in the United States, and we have a great relationship. This is January 2020. Obviously, we know what happens in 2020, but here's Trump at the beginning of 2020. Woodward says, Trump's China deal is now largely considered a bust, but Trump regularly and publicly declares it the greatest trade deal ever. Again, useful commentary. More. This is in relation to the ongoing discussion about the Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, the GERD. I've talked about this, I think, in the Power of Geography. If you're interested to learn more about the GERD, there is a link in the description as well as a card for that video. But the president, as always, talks to a couple leaders and then takes credit for having solved a great problem. And here he basically says that there was some miracle that he negotiated. Trump says, he's the boss over there. And he says, to me, it's a miracle. I cannot believe it. He said, I called not thinking you could do it, but knowing you were the only man in the world that could do it. I said it was easy. It was very easy. Here's Woodward's commentary. It appears that a lasting deal was never reached, and Trump's role was never clear at the time. But months later, Trump publicly suggested Egypt might blow up the dam. Ethiopia's foreign ministry accused Trump of trying to incite a war between Egypt and Ethiopia. The former prime minister of Ethiopia said of Trump, the man doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. I don't think the president even knows where Ethiopia is on a map. What is he talking about? Remember, this is the president who asked the president of Liberia, where did you learn how to speak English so well? Of course, not realizing English is the official language of Liberia. Well, why would you know that? That would just take the slightest bit of curiosity. It would take the slightest moment to look down at your briefing sheet that would have been handed to you by your staff before you go into a meeting with the president of Liberia for you to say something so embarrassing. Trump, I created the greatest economy in the history of our country. Once again, the idea that a president can take credit for how the life of hundreds of millions of people go, when there's also situations in the world, there's interest rates, there's trends in business. Why is he obsessed with the idea that he is the one who takes the credit? It's always exaggerated in the American news cycle. The presidents can take credit for either good or bad things in the economy. All the president can do is move a couple levers. The rest is up to the people of the country whether they're going to do anything about it. The president can't go out and work 16-hour days for these other people, but yet he wants to take all the credit for it. And so then he's going to blame it that COVID crushed it. And part of it was his response to COVID. The way that the United States developed under COVID was directly due to his actions. Here he is talking about China, and again, the tone deafness of his own rhetoric. He talks about, make America great again, and that's important. And yet he doesn't realize, is it possible that other countries feel that way as well? And just to use the phrase, I don't care for it, but let's just use it. Make China great again, make Ethiopia great again, make Russia great again. That if he believes in this idea, wouldn't other countries potentially believe in that? And if other countries believe in that, wouldn't they strive towards that? So here Trump says, I said, when you say China 25, and this was a program, China 2025 at the time, that means you want to be number one in 25. Well, that's very insulting to me that you would say that, because I'm running things here and I want to be number one too. I don't want you to say China 25 because that means too many bad things. I don't like it. Can you imagine? You can't even have a friendly competition with somebody. If you don't want someone else to be number one, then you just work hard. But you're insulted. You're hurt. Your feelings are hurt. That's very insulting to me that you would say that. How dare you want your country to be number one? Can you imagine? He can't even just say, okay, well, if China wants to be number 125, let's see how that goes. And just put your head down and work. That would normally actually be the response of a business owner, which he always says that he is. But he's not. He's a petty, insecure person who was never told enough by his father that he was loved. That's what we see here. We see on display a deeply insecure man who continues to run our country and does it entirely based on his insecurities. February of 2020, here's more. My polls went up 10 points, Bob. You saw it. I've got the highest numbers now. Again, obsessed with polling. Obsessed with what is being said rather than what's being done. All that matters is the optics. I got the photo op with Kim Jong-un. I did this. I solved 9 wars. It doesn't matter whether any of it's true. The president just throws it out there and he sees whether people pick it up or not. But the reality is he's just a braggart. None of what he's talking about is actually real. I talked about this in the Rage book review, but it's worth repeating, especially because not all of you who are watching this are going to go back and watch that book review for whatever reason. And this is Woodward commenting on what Kushner said to him. The president said, "Oh, you should go talk to Jared. He's really smart. He'll tell you more things." And Kushner does talk to Woodward. And Kushner says, so this is Woodward's commentary, Jared Kushner's recommendation for understanding Trump was to consider the advice of the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. He paraphrased the cat. If you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. The Cheshire Cat's strategy was one of endurance and persistence, not direction. Remember the I don't have a strategy? He said it himself. Another text Kushner suggested I read to understand Trump was Scott Adams' book, Win Bigly, Persuasion in a World Where Facts Don't Matter. Adams, the creator of the Dilbert comic strip, explains in his book that Trump's misstatements of facts are not regrettable errors or ethical lapses, but part of a technique called intentional wrongness persuasion. Adams argues that Trump can invent any reality for most voters on most issues, and all you will remember is that he provided his reasons, he didn't apologize, and his opponents called him a liar like they always did. I was astonished at the time that Kushner would deliver such a hard, negative assessment of his father-in-law. Was it possible the best roadmap for understanding this administration was a novel about a young girl who falls through a rabbit hole and a book that argued the president could persuade people he was right even when he lied? And I think that's aged very well. Those points were made in 2020. That book was released not that long after COVID really hit. I want to say it was mid-2022. Sorry. Rage was released right before the 2020 election. Sorry about that. This is from March of 2020. And again, when you have the person on tape, it's even better. But Woodward is talking to him about Fauci and Birx, Dr. Birx, and Trump says, she's fantastic. Deborah Birx, she's fantastic. And they're professionals, and they've done it, you know. Dr. Birx was involved with the fight against AIDS, the fight against Ebola. Woodward tries to get a word in. He goes, what's the best idea? And Trump interrupts, beautiful, elegant woman. I don't know if you noticed it. So that's really, Trump is going back to what really matters to him. He talked about all her academic credentials, but remember, ultimately, he's a beauty pageant guy who likes to walk in on women who are naked. He talks about it. He's bragged about it before. And Dr. Birx, despite all of her expertise, she's a beautiful, elegant woman. I don't know if you noticed. Again, this is just the lulz for miles. April 2020. And here Woodward says, this is a question about your leadership, and I want to know how you feel about it. Second is the medical, and he's again probing on COVID. I feel good. I think we're doing a great job. I think we'll never get credit from the fake news media, no matter how good a job we do. No matter how good a job I do, I will never get credit from the media, and I'll never get credit from Democrats who want to beat me desperately in 7 months. Once again, great leaders, transformational leaders, generational leaders don't sit and cry to a reporter about not getting credit from these people who he thinks are his enemies. Fine, if you've established that, move on. But he has to say that over and over and over and over and over. He can't just move on and get the work done. That's what real leaders do. They get the work done no matter what the circumstances are, and they don't cry and complain about it to a reporter the way the president does because he's deeply insecure. That's what insecure people do. They complain and they cry about stuff all the time instead of just getting the work done. This is a phone call from April 2020, and at the top of this chapter, Woodward has the quote from Trump. You wrote 4 books, and he's referring to Woodward's 4 books on the Bush presidency. You wrote 4 books. Bush took, I heard that he took a lot of time with you. He was not a bright man. How he ever got to be president is mind-boggling to me. Mind-boggling. People could say that about President Trump. The idea that he would position himself as a very smart person, a person who doesn't read, a person who doesn't study, a person who doesn't listen, a person who reverses himself every day, a person who appoints somebody and then fires them a few weeks later, would you classify that person as smart? And here he is, again, projection. He's talking about how dumb Bush is. And I'm not here to defend President Bush. I think he was a dummy in his own right. But the idea that he's so far distant, he can't believe how Bush got elected because Bush was so dumb. Remember that prior to 9/11, part of the reason I voted for George Bush back when I was still voting in American politics, one of the things that really sounded good to me was humble foreign policy and no nation building. Then 9/11 happened and that all changed. But that's the point, is that if you have principles, even when things happen, you find a way for your principles to live in this new universe. You don't change your principles because of circumstances. And that's what, if we believe Bush, that he did. He had principles, then he took them to the side the minute something happened. So if you have principles, they abide even though disastrous things happen. You find a way to have your principles work in a changed world. You don't find a way to change your principles. Now, what's different with a man like Trump is he has no principles. The president has no enduring moral beliefs that guide his actions. It's whatever A, Israel tells him to do, and B, whatever his gut tells him to do. Those are his guiding lights. There's nothing else really going on. Maybe what Kushner or Witkoff say to him. Maybe that's number 3. Trump, look, you know I was not a Bush fan. Woodward, I understand. Trump, okay, not because I dislike him. He's been very nice, actually. But I thought he was, totally unqualified for the job. But he was. I never saw anything like it, and I wasn't a big fan. The only reason that the father got a good funeral was because of me. Because they figured by building up Bush, that makes me look bad. You understand? Again, I'm not here for Bush 1 or Bush 2 in their presidencies. I have a lot of negative things I could say, but the idea that he is so much better and so far distant from them is unbelievable. Lack of self-awareness, and it redounds to the fact that if he knew his history, he wouldn't talk like that, but he doesn't know his history, so that's why he does. Woodward, I'm going to tell you, when I'm all done, Trump interrupts, because nobody else could have done what I've done, and nobody else. There's no president that's done what I've done in my first 3.5 years. No president. I hope you treat me better than Bush because you made him look like a stupid moron, which he was. Anyway, Bob, you take care of yourself, okay? All Woodward does would quote back. If you read those books, and I read all 4 of those books, they were deeply fascinating to me because for the first time I felt that I was inside the U.S. presidency, because he talked to Armitage, Powell, Condi Rice, and we got a notion of what the Bush presidency looked like. That's why those books were good to read. If Bush looked like an idiot, it was only because that's the actual truth. And so when he says, well, you're going to make me look like an idiot, he just published all of the tapes of you talking, you look like an idiot. That's there. It's not, Woodward doesn't have to try hard to make the president look bad. The president does fine on his own. He does it in front of all of the world's media all the time, and he's doing it here. And so the idea is, I'm going to tell you all these things, and then you're going to make me look good. Why? That's not his job. His job is not to make you look good. His job is to report what is happening at this particular time in history. And the president can't seem to grasp that. He always thinks he has to get good media. That's how he is. Trump, remember, no president has done what I've done in 3.5 years. More. If you're enjoying this content, please consider hitting like or subscribe. It's a way for people who might be interested in this to get access to this video as well. This was from June of 2020, and this was post George Floyd. Woodward is just so unbearable in this section because he's continuing to lecture the president, and conversation about Black Lives Matter and the racial problems in the U.S. I think that's a valid conversation to have at another time. I don't really want to platform Woodward's sort of lecturing of the president on this point. I just want to note another historical problem here with the president. Remember, if you don't know something, just don't say something. But don't say, you're so used to lying and making things up that even when it's a low stakes matter, you're wrong and you're exposed. And this was referring to walking across to the church near the White House and holding a Bible. I think the Bible was upside down, whatever it might have been. Trump says, I thought it was terrible that they tried to rip down a church that was built simultaneously with the White House, whose first parishioner was James Madison, who was also the first person in the White House, number 6. Woodward says, James Madison was the 4th president of the U.S. John Adams, the second president of the U.S., was the first to live in the White House. Remember, none of that would matter if you didn't continue to say over and over, you're the greatest ever, you're the greatest president ever, greatest in history. And then when it comes to something basic, like who was the first president to live in the White House, who was the first commissioner, etc. I'm thinking of a moment where Sebastian Vettel is asked on camera, name as many champions of F1 as you can, and he goes back and he names all of them. And that is outrageous. No one would expect an F1 driver, any F1 driver, even if you're a student of the sport, to go back and name every, but he does. And if I can find a link, if I can find that video, I'll put a link in the description to it. It's extraordinary. But that's an F1 driver, and he can. The president can't. Do you think the president could name all the presidents of the United States? And he's the president. And he talks about how he's the greatest. If you're the greatest, you should be a student of the other presidents, and you should know what they did. But he doesn't. I don't know if he could name 15, 20 presidents at the most. And here, this is more talking about what he's been able to do for the black community. And here Trump gets hung up on his particular legislative achievements. I think the essence of my responsibility is to do a good job for all communities, all communities. The essence of my responsibility is to help people. And I think that I've helped the black community more than any president outside, Woodward says, I know you've said that, outside of Abraham Lincoln. And I mean that fully, because nobody else has done what I've done. This is his favorite phrase. Nobody else has, and then fill in the blank. Nobody else has done what I've done, whether it's criminal justice reform, whether it's opportunity zones, whether it's historically black colleges and universities. Nobody has done what I have done except for the late, great Abraham Lincoln. Continues on, Bob, I'm somebody that likes to get things done rather than talk. Does anyone believe that? That the president likes to get things done rather than talk? He loves to talk. That's his favorite thing. That's all he really ever does. And so here in this conversation, and we're still in 2020, Woodward is asking, what have you learned about yourself? Asking for some introspection from the man who's ostensibly the most powerful man in the world. It's a pretty straightforward and important and simple question. This is from July 21st, 2020. What have you learned about yourself? Trump sighs audibly. Woodward, you have to have learned. Trump, that I can handle more than other people can handle. Because, and I'll tell you what, whether I learned about myself, more people come up to me and say, and I mean very strong people, people that are successful even, a lot of people. They say, I swear to you, I don't know how it's possible for you to handle what you've handled. How you've done this with the kind of opposition, the kind of shenanigans, the kind of illegal witch hunts. They're illegal, by the way. I don't know how you do that. A lot of people have said, I have no idea how you were able to handle it. So not recognizing a lot of the trouble created in the Trump administration has been self-inflicted. Bad appointments, inability to keep classified documents, the president just taking documents wherever he wants. A lot of these have been own goals. So the idea that I don't know how you've been able to handle it. Well, I caused most of them. What am I going to do? Just quit? What, you're supposed to get credit because you endure through scandals of your own making? President still needs credit here. Woodward comments at the end of this section, all presidents have a large obligation to inform, warn, protect, to define goals and the true national interest. It should be a truth-telling response to the world, especially in crisis. Trump has instead enshrined personal grievance and division as a governing principle of his presidency. Woodward was using this to talk about Corona, about COVID, and yet we could use this exact same thing to overlay and talk about his response to almost anything, particularly to the current Iran situation. Once again, a situation of the president's own making. Iran did not attack anybody. We attacked Iran along with Israel. This is August of 2020. Here, Trump is presaging Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi would go back and use this idea, this energy later on. I mean, more than a little bit, the economy, look, but the economy is doing, look, we're close to a new stock market record. So that's what matters. And he continues, for whatever reason, it's where the stocks are. And 401ks are doing phenomenally well. You know, they're up 57% since March, Bob. Again, made up number. And Woodward comments, according to Fidelity, the average 401k balance increased 14% in the second quarter of 2020. I mean, 14 versus 57 is a pretty large difference. This is the epilogue. This is just Woodward talking. I get people. I'm sorry, this is Woodward speaking, but he uses a Trump quote to start. I get people. They come up with ideas, but the ideas are mine, Bob. The ideas are mine. Want to know something? Everything is mine. Everything is mine. That is Trump's view of the presidency that comes across over and over in our interviews. The presidency is mine. It is still mine. The only view that matters is mine. This is a man who's had 20 interviews with this president just for this book. Forget about all of the research he did on the first book called Fear. So the last thing I want to read today is the final letter of Kim Jong-un, at least that we have access to. And these were printed letters. August of 2019 from Kim Jong-un to the president. And I think it's an excellent way to summarize the entire narrative of what was going on with North Korea at the time. And I have to admit, I'm quite surprised at the eloquence of Kim Jong-un. Even if this was ghostwritten for him, that whoever was writing for him was quite eloquent and has an understanding of world affairs and situations. So we don't know a lot about the Hermit Kingdom, but I think it's fascinating to see how Kim Jong-un puts forward this entire letter. So I might comment, but some of it might just be very self-evident to you if you've gotten this far in the review. August the 5th, 2019, Your Excellency, which is the proper way to address the U.S. president if you're a foreigner. More than 30 days have passed since we've had a meaningful reunion on June the 30th at the North-South Military Demarcation Line, a symbol of hostility and confrontation. Truly, even as I recall it again, I'm struck at what a great moment it was. I'm delighted to receive each and every single picture you specifically chose from that day, which holds special meaning and will remain an eternal memory from that momentous and historic day. Those photographs now hang in my office. I express my appreciation to you, and I will remember that moment forever. Your Excellency has left an extraordinary historical legacy, and going forward will continue to lead a great change in history. Your Excellency, I remember clearly the promise I made 30 days ago to have experts from our two countries sit down face to face in a few weeks' time to discuss the work that Your Excellency had and I needed to do in the future. However, the current environment is different from that day. My belief was that the provocative combined military exercises would either be canceled or postponed ahead of our two countries' working level negotiations where we would continue to discuss important matters. Against whom is the combined military exercises taking place in the southern part of the Korean peninsula? Who are they trying to block? And who are they intended to defeat and attack? And this shows that lack of accountability. The president is engaged in diplomacy with the head of North Korea, but then they still do war games against North Korea. It's just tone deafness and a lack of coordination with the other branches of government. It can't be that the South Korean forces are discussing the issue of wartime operational control in order to fight a tribe on the other side of the earth or to fight against the Iranian army 70,000 kilometers away. Conceptually and hypothetically, the main target of the war, preparatory exercises, is our military. This is not our misunderstanding. As if to support our view, a few days ago, the person who they call the Minister of National Defense of South Korea said that the modernization of our conventional commercial weapons was deemed a provocation and a threat, and that if we continue to provoke and threaten, they will classify my administration and military as an enemy. Now and in the future, South Korean military cannot be my enemy. As you mentioned, at some point, we have a strong military without the need of special means, and the truth is that the South Korean military is no match against my military. We know this. It doesn't. Kim Jong-un says this, but you wouldn't know that if you listen to the president talk about anything. Putting aside the disparity in military strength, I have no intention of either attacking South Korea or of starting a war. I truly do not have those thoughts. The problem is, why do they engage in this noisy commotion with these exercises, saying that they are preparing themselves with the assumption that there will be a bloody fratricidal war that nobody wants to think about? Instead, it would be wiser for them to think of ways to reduce military tensions by improving relations with us. It's a reasonable conversation. He sees that they are one people. They are all Koreans on that peninsula. He doesn't want a murder. He calls it fratricidal. Again, someone reasonable, someone who's not enthralled to the military-industrial complex. The thing I like even less is that the US military is engaged in these paranoid and hypersensitive actions with the South Korean people. I do not understand the purpose of having these war games that we consider as threatening at the time when we are looking ahead of this very important meeting. At present, it is very difficult for me and my people to understand your sides and the South Korean authorities' decisions and actions. The most important cause of what your side considers the headache of missile threats and nuclear problem is the military actions of your side and the South Korean military that threatens our safety. And until these elements are eliminated, no changed outcome can be anticipated. I am clearly offended, and I do not want to hide this feeling from you. I am really very offended. At every opportunity after we met, you said there are no more artificial earthquakes and no objects flying in the sky. You also said that the detainees have been released and returned, and the remains have been returned. I think he was referring to remains from the Korean War. In this vein, I have done more than I can at the present stage, very responsively and practically in order to keep the trust we have. However, what has Your Excellency done, and what am I to explain to my people about what has changed since we met? Again, the President's a photo op guy. He's not actually doing any work. Have actions been relaxed or any of my country's external environments been improved? Have military exercises been stopped? It would be a big mistake if the U.S. self-assesses this as an accomplishment of U.S. policy towards the DPRK through use of pressure and dialogue. I do not wish to do anything to disappoint you anytime soon, nor do I plan to do so. If you do not think of our relationship as a stepping stone that only benefits you, then you would not make me look like an idiot that will only give without getting anything in return. This is huge in Asian culture, particularly for the leader of an Asian culture. My letter has gone long, but to state my main point, regrettably now is not the time to engage in working level talks. It is not the right atmosphere in my country, and if we were to move forward with working level talks now, our leadership would be viewed as strange by the outside world and by us as well. We will not have to reconsider the working level talks when the war games of the U.S. and South Korea that I so strongly asked to be stopped becomes a thing of the past weekend. What kind of working level talks could we possibly have? It obviously would not be about the sanctions relief, which I very much wanted, nor will it be about the location of our fourth summit talks. To put it another way, we are not in a hurry. If this were like Hanoi, just a few months ago, when I held on to the dream of hastening the start of a better life, it would be different. But we are in a different situation, and we are not in a hurry. And there are now about 5 months left until the end of the year, which I commented on at one point. In coming up with a good agreement, these months can be seen as long or as short, depending on what we do. Please reach out to me again when the military game and war game with South Korea has ended. At that time, we will discuss the time and location of the working level talks. Your Excellency, I am immensely proud and honored that we have a relationship where I can send and receive such candid thoughts with you. You are a statesman with great might. I consider it an honor to have this special relationship with you. I will put in even greater effort, Mr. President, to protect my faith with you. Just on this paragraph alone, I do think that Kim actually means this, but he's also playing, as most world leaders do, to Trump's vanity. He knows that Trump loves to hear these things, and we're coming to the end of the letter, so he needs to throw on the vanity a bit. Okay, fine. I see this as statecraft. As you also commented, while we were improvement testing very small missiles, which all nations do, we slightly surprised the fools in the South, and it was quite amusing. I hope that you always enjoy good health, Mr. President, and my wish is for you to realize even greater accomplishments. To your respected First Lady and your loving family, I send my warm wishes and greetings, Kim Jong-un. August the 5th, 2019. I'm not trying to pretend that Kim Jong-un is some wonderful person. I'm just pointing out that part of statecraft and part of working with other nations is not about your morally approving of them, but politics is art of the possible. And the president has shown over and over that he's simply not a great politician, and that's reflected on the fact that he wasn't ever really even a good businessman. Conversations for another time. This review has gone longer than I expected. Well, what can you do when you're just reading the mumblings of a deluded, insecure, unintelligent person? And that's ultimately where we are. I'm not trying to distance myself from that. I've often said that we have the leaders that we deserve. Leaders are a reflection of the society that they come from. And the American society is polluted and disgusting, and that's why we have the leader that we have. There's nothing else to be done for it until a nation returns to Christ, and until it puts love at the center of our lives, as Christ did. There's no future for a country. You can't move beyond that. And that is certainly not what Mr. I'm on my third marriage and I cheated on every woman who's ever been a mother of my children. That is not how America would ever become great again. If we were to ask every person in the United States who is the person who could make America great again, one of the last people I would ever choose is Donald J. Trump. So, all that being said, if you'd like to buy a copy of this and read it for yourself, that's one of the ways that you can support this channel. There's links to that in the description. A free way you can support this channel by hitting like or subscribe, hyping the video. It's one of the ways that you can get this out to more people. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation in particular, you can use Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. They're linked in the description below. If you'd like to get early access to videos like this one, as well as a behind-the-scenes monthly video talking about what I'm reading and what I'm thinking, there's links to Patreon and YouTube membership. If you'd like to nominate a book for the future, there's a link to my Amazon wish list below. You'll see different books in there, including books on Palestine. That's from my Palestine bookshelf project. If you'd like to check that out, feel free. But all the books that are not on Palestine are for this channel. You can buy one for me, send it my way, and I'll do my best to review it in a timely manner. Until next time, enjoy your reading.